Chapter 3 Red Spider Lily 6 years. 6 years had passed since the night of Inko Midoriya's death. Authorities had investigated the especially gruesome death of not only her, but 7 other similar deaths in the months following hers. The despicable killer would strike around once a month, usually targeting petty criminals and the likes. The wounds were seemingly caused by human teeth, and DNA tests on saliva left on the scene would prove the main suspect was indeed a young Izuku Midoriya. After 12 months of murders, the killer would suddenly disappear with no further killings for the next 5 years. There was no official motive for why this child would kill his own mother, and then go on to kill 7 more people who were all petty criminals. With it being possible, some other murders were also linked to him, though these were all unconfirmed. The initial investigation into the Midoriya family would uncover that young Izuku was often left alone at home and had apparently developed a sickness within the last year of his mother being alive. There were also reports of a young child being spotted in downtown Mustafu City, using their quirk on a petty criminal who had apparently tried to kidnap a young woman. Forensics were able to confirm that some of the blood left at the scene was indeed Izuku Midoriya's. It may be possible that his quirk is one which requires him to kill or consume human meat, or it may cause some sort of fascination with death, though this is only a theory at the moment. It is also possible that this case is tied to the recent corpse collector cases, which have plagued Mustafu, Hosu, and Esua cities. This was all the important evidence within the case file on Izuku that Tsukuyoichi had received. The old investigator had finally retired after a stress-related heart attack, and had recommended that Tsukuyoichi take over the case due to his impressive record. The file also mentioned that a couple heroes had also aided with the case, such as Eraserhead and Ingenium, who had a few murders within the cities they often patrolled. There had been several sightings of someone that resembled Izuku, but in recent years the sightings have dwindled to almost nothing, and the case was now widely considered to have gone cold. Most of his fellow investigators offered their support, though they'd make it a point that this case was near impossible to resolve. They had the suspect, now all they needed to do was track him down and make the arrest. But not even Tsukuyoichi's predecessor could do that. Either way, he would take the case and do his best to resolve it. First order of business, getting in touch with Eraserhead and Ingenium to catch up on everything they knew. 6 years. 6 years with this wacko had gone by way too quickly. That's what Izuku would think as he watched Twice struggle to use the first vacuum they had in a long while. Twice, you have to step on that part before you pull on the handle. That's how you put it into drive mode. Izuku would then watch on as Twice did just that, smiling happily at his little accomplishment. Hey, don't look at me like that. I could have gotten it by myself. In fact, I was just about to try doing just that, Twice said, shaking his fist at Izuku, who simply smirked and crossed his arms. Sure, whatever you say, Twice. Seriously, what would you do without me? This set Twice off, making him quickly abandon his vacuum cleaner and dive towards Deku. Alright, that's it, you little gutter snipe! And what ensued was a brief but quite one-sided little scuffle. Of course, it was all in good fun, but Izuku easily overpowered Twice and had him on the floor, frantically saying uncle. This was something that seemed to happen every single day, with Deku getting on Twice's nerves and causing them to wrestle. A normal person would probably be a little concerned, but this was just how Deku and Twice rolled. They were weird, a very unique pair of brothers, but they loved each other and cared all the same. And this is how they showed it. Deku would ruffle Twice's hair before letting him back up, standing tall and proud with his little victory. Twice would stand up as well, being quite taller than Deku at this point, dusting himself off and looking angrily at his little brother, though it was all just for show. Dang, I always forget just how strong you've gotten. What happened to that little brother who would carry that stuffed bear everywhere he went? Deku's cheeks would turn a bright red, with his gaze turning towards the floor. What? What little bear? I don't recall that. Heck, I don't even like stuffed animals. I'd never own one. Twice would put his hands on his hips and stare at the preteen with a look that said, "Oh, really?" Which only made Deku even more nervous. Well, nice talking to you Twice. I think I'm gonna go to my room and take a nap, he'd say, rubbing the back of his neck nervously before walking away. Alright, champ. Have fun with Mr. Bear, Twice yelled out, a sly smile on his face. Izuku would freeze up for a second before rushing off into his room and slamming the door, which just made Twice chuckle to himself. The villain would then continue to vacuum the living room, happy to do so. It was nice to finally have a proper apartment. Sure, it was pretty run down and ugly, but it was their home. And Twice took pride in having a clean house. It was also the only place he could walk around without a mask, for the most part. Ever since Deku had come into the picture, he had slowly started to feel better and safer without a mask. He still needed it when outside, but inside their own home, with someone he trusted, he could finally just be himself without any barriers. He did still have panic attacks occasionally though, but Deku would always run over and help out, and Twice did the same whenever his little brother had them as well. They looked out for each other, almost like they were the perfect team, and so Twice kept on cleaning, thinking about how lucky he was to have such a great brother. Meanwhile, Izuku was in his room, hugging Mr. Bear and saying he was sorry for bad-mouthing the Stuffy earlier. He then set the bear off to the side of his bed, where Twice could never find it, before walking up to his bench press. Izuku laid down on the bench, his long black mohawk falling on top the headrest, and began to play some music while he lifted the bar. This was how he spent most of his time, doing simple calisthenics and building up his strength. By no means was Izuku ripped, but he did have a surprising amount of strength for a 12-year-old. Working out had another side effect though, which was that it made his quirk stronger. Izuku had figured this out about a year ago, since whenever he healed, it was almost as if he came back twice as strong, though it would make him hungrier faster. Instead of going out and fighting all the time, Izuku would simply work out, which tore his muscles, basically hurting himself, and his healing factor would kick in. It was a cycle of workout, heal quickly, become stronger, and then work out again. In only a year, the preteen was able to lift around 400 pounds if he really tried. It was a much slower burn to only work out like this, but it did increase his strength and the strength of his quirk. Other than working out, Izuku often read books, a couple of which were books on flowers and farming techniques. And on very rare occasions, the preteen would watch or read books on the subjects of heroes. They often resolved issues without having to hurt anyone more than they needed to, and sometimes without any violence at all, which Izuku greatly admired. He hated violence now. It was incredibly triggering to him, reminding the preteen of a time in his life that he'd rather not remember. Back then he was a bad person. That wasn't who he was anymore. While Izuku was deep in thought, Twice would open the door and stick his head into the room. Hey kiddo, are we gonna go soon? It's getting kinda late and I don't like that place when it's dark. Izuku would rack the bar and sit up, wiping the sweat from his face and sighing heavily. I was just thinking about it. Let's go. We'll pick up some incense and flowers on the way. Izuku would get dressed and put on a black hoodie before leaving with Twice, who had put on a black, skin-tight suit. The two would soon visit a local market and pick up some incense and aloe flowers right before they closed. Izuku liked the aloe flowers. They were pretty, but also unique, and besides, he read somewhere that they symbolized affection and grief. It wasn't much, but it was the best they can do for now, especially since money was tight after getting the new apartment. The journey was filled with silence, which Izuku knew Twice hated, but was putting up with for his sake. Twice was always super considerate like that, and knowing what today was, had probably prepared himself to be silent for most of the walk. This had become a tradition in the last few years, one that took a lot out of Deku, but Twice had convinced him to do it anyways. And really, it was a nice thing to do. It helped Izuku process some stuff he had locked away deep in his mind. The only thing was, it also reminded him of his dark side, and sometimes made him have a panic attack before or afterwards. Deku shook his head, trying to keep his mind clear as the duo drew closer to their location. It was a small plot of land on the outskirts of the town, only a couple hundred meters away from a prominent rice field. Once on the dirt road leading to the field, Izuku's grip on the small bag carrying the flowers and incense had tightened, with Twice noticing it. The villain put a hand on Deku's shoulder, gripping it lightly for reassurance. "Come on, bud. You got this." Izuku would nod, his grip not loosening, but he continued walking on, all the way up to the dirt road that led to a small graveyard. There, 4 rows back, 6 stones from the left, is where Izuku's mother was laid to rest. Once he entered the yard's fence, Izuku would begin to tear up, but he held himself upright, not faltering one bit as he walked to her grave. Twice stayed silent, but rubbed the kid's back softly as they approached. Though Izuku tried to keep the tears back, once reading his mother's gravestone, he'd fall to his knees and begin to weep. He cursed himself for being so weak and crying like a baby, all while Twice knelt down next to him and rubbed his back reassuringly. Izuku, while still crying, would take out the aloe flowers and set them down next to his mother's grave. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'd take it all back if I could. I'm sorry," is all Izuku could say before he got choked up. Even if his body couldn't apologize, his mind was profusely doing so. After a few minutes of crying, Izuku would wipe away his tears and stand up. Twice had always said that there was nothing wrong with crying, especially over his mother, but Deku still hated it. And he had cried many times to his mother, both before and after the incident, and he was sure she'd want him to be happy for once while here. He probably didn't even have the right to cry about her anyways, not after what he did. But when visiting her grave, it felt as if she was there in spirit and were reassuring him herself, saying that it was okay to cry. No matter how many defenses Izuku put up, they all melted away here. Maybe that feeling of reassurance from his mother was all in his head, but it was so comforting that he didn't care. Maybe it was selfish. Maybe this whole journey was selfish. But it helped Izuku cope and accept what happened. Twice would put a hand on Deku's shoulder, the latter looking up at the villain. Twice was holding up a big thumbs up, basically asking if he was all good now. And though he couldn't see it, Izuku knew that his big brother was giving him that big dumb Twice smile he always gave. Deku would wipe away a stray tear before nodding. "Yeah, I'm fine now. You can talk," Izuku said, looking down at the grave once more. This time, noticing a bundle of flowers that he didn't see through all the tears earlier. "Ah, thank God! I had so many things I wanted to say. Like, do sloths have nipples?" Izuku picked up the bouquet and looked over them, while ignoring Twice for a quick second, feeling as if he had seen these before. He knew what they were, just not why he thought he'd seen them. The bundle held a mixture of dark blue asagaos and sutopis, but underneath these flowers was a single red spider lily, with a small note next to it. The two would then suddenly have swords shoved through them, impaling the ghoul through the stomach and twice in his abdomen, right above his hip. 2 years, a man yelled out as he pulled the sword out of Twice and kicked him away. It took 2 years to track both of you down. Luckily, you make this trip an annual thing. Izuku looked from the white blade impaling him, up towards the person holding it. It was a tall, average-build man, wearing a hoodie with his drawstrings fully pulled, his face and eyes barely visible. The man would then stab his other blade through Izuku's ribcage, piercing one of his lungs. He then proceeded to pull his swords out of Izuku, who fell to his knees and looked over to where Twice was. The villain was on the ground, holding his gaping wound and freaking out over whether he turned into goo or not. This pissed Izuku off, who quickly activated his quirk and leapt back from where the intruder was. Luckily, he had trained his quirk, so his healing was able to take care of even these grievous wounds. Leave us alone! I don't want to kill you, but I will! So, you can heal from something like that, huh? I guess I'll just have to take off a couple of appendages. Well, it's a good test for this trigger thing at least, said the man, pulling out a syringe and sticking it right into his neck. Izuku watched as the man injected whatever was in that syringe into himself, while occasionally looking over to Twice, making sure he wasn't dead yet. He didn't want to fight anyone, but he needed to get Twice to a doctor quickly. This guy would just chase him down though, and probably do even more damage to Twice. There had to be some sort of way to get this guy to stop. Something he wants, maybe. What do you want with us? You can take whatever, just let us go, Izuku pleaded. This man, who was now clenching his fists and laughing a bit, looked over to Izuku and smiled wickedly. I've been tasked with killing you, and this trigger, or whatever, feels awesome. Sorry, kid, but I'm gonna take it for a test drive on both of you. The man lunged towards Izuku, white spikes tearing out of his hoodie while 2 white blades appeared from inside his sleeves, while a white substance covered his exposed hands and face. Izuku was just barely able to dodge his attacker's wild swings, the man laughing like a maniac the whole time. The ghoul didn't dare use his Kagane, but the thoughts kept coming into his mind. Just kill the man, shoot a blade right into his exposed neck, or maybe one right into his eye. No, he couldn't kill someone again, not after the last time. There had to be some sort of non-lethal option. Twice was watching his brother duck and dodge the man's attacks, with himself leaning up against a gravestone. He was scared of becoming goo, but was equally worried about Deku. This guy looked like trouble, like a real bad villain. After all, he was able to sneak up on and attack both of them. Twice was in pain, but he didn't care. He needed to stop this fight somehow. He knew the longer this went on, the worse off everybody would be, especially Deku. He would attempt to stand up, using the gravestone as support, but as soon as he put pressure on his leg, a searing pain would shoot through his hip and he'd fall back to the ground. Damn it, he needed to move, but he couldn't. Twice was useless right now. All he could do was watch Izuku helplessly. If only he could create a double of someone other than Izuku. Well, there is always yourself, a voice would speak within his mind. Twice shook his head. There was no way he could copy himself. The last time that happened, he was nearly killed. It was too dangerous. He might even get Deku killed. He'd just have to figure something else out. He'd help out his brother, if it's the last thing he did. Izuku would continue dodging the man's manic swinging while trying to think up a plan. It looked as if this man was able to either manipulate or create structures out of this white substance, either concrete or maybe even bone or some sort of marble. If the latter was true, then if Izuku put the man in a headlock, he'd just shoot some bone spikes through him. If Izuku was able to break the substance, he might be able to do so until the man has no more to use, or is unable to create any more. But if he simply manipulates bones and is using his own bones, then Deku would basically be killing him. Maybe he could just kick him hard enough in the head to knock him out. Yeah, that'd work. It'd be the easiest way to keep everyone from dying. While dodging another swing from the man, Izuku would spin in the air and swing his foot down onto the man's head, a kick that would completely rock a normal person, if not kill them. But this was no normal person, and Izuku figured that out the moment his foot made contact. The man's head was completely rock hard, almost as if it was covered with bone. And before the ghoul could retreat, the man would grab onto his leg, driving a bone blade directly through it. The ghoul would scream out in pain as his leg was severed, with him falling onto the ground, rolling around in pain. "Ha! That actually really hurt, kid. Not bad at all. Not many people can break me, but with this stuff, I'm basically impossible to kill. I mean, I can just keep creating more and more bone now. And since you can heal, I think I'll be able to repay you tenfold. Have to incapacitate you anyways," yelled out the man before he grew some bone spikes through his boots and began kicking and stomping on Izuku, all within view of Twice. Twice would curse himself once more, hating what he saw. He tried to stand up, only to fall back onto the ground. He'd begin to crawl towards the fight, his wound scraping against the ground, which only caused him more pain. It hurt like hell, but Twice needed to help Deku. This wasn't good. At any moment, this guy could just... No. Twice wouldn't let that happen. He would protect his brother from that fate. Twice continued to crawl towards his little brother, desperately clawing at the ground in order to get to him. Ultimately, this was way too slow. His body was only being dragged forward inch by inch due to how much pain it caused. Come on. He needed to go faster. Needed to be by Deku's side right then and there. His brother needed him right now, and yet he was being a useless older brother just laying there. Damn it, he needed to go faster. If only he had been quicker and dodged that attack earlier. Damn it, body, just move. Meanwhile, Izuku was looking up into the night sky. The sun was barely setting when they had gotten to the graveyard, but it was winter, so maybe the sun just set faster? Either way, the stars were starting to really shine now, and they looked pretty. "You know you're dying, right?" a voice said, one which rang throughout Izuku's head. It was a familiar voice, one which Izuku knew would come right about now. I know. I'm fine with it. I can see Mom again," Izuku responded. "True, but that's pretty selfish of you. You'd let Twice live with the guilt of watching you die? Also, you could be happy? That's just cruel," the voice said, taunting Izuku with its wicked sense of humor. "That's not what I meant, and you know that. But besides, this guy won't stop until I'm dead. I'll die anyways. But at least this way Twice can live." "Well, there is another way. We could simply kill this guy. We have the ability to do so, and then we could eat him too. We both know you were going to collect a corpse after this," said the voice, who talked about death so nonchalantly that it pissed Izuku off. "I can't kill anyone. I hate it. And what about the families of the people I kill?" "And what about your family?" Both went silent for a while, them simply looking up into the night sky as their body was impaled over and over. The feeling of warm blood soaked through their clothing and into the cold ground beneath them. Killing isn't wrong. Surviving isn't wrong. You have to fight for everything in this world, and if you're weak, you'll lose everything," said the voice, before Izuku felt himself alone in his mind once more. That's when he noticed that the man had stopped his attack. Izuku looked over to where Twice was, only to notice that he was gone. Izuku frantically followed a trail of blood that led right up to his attacker, where Twice stood, holding a knife that was stuck into the man's ribcage. "Ah, that really hurts. I can't kill the kid, and was gonna let you live, but after that, you're dead!" The man will hold out his hand, a bone scythe forming in it, though a bit slower than it took him to make swords and spikes earlier. "Now both of you are going to die. Nobody cracks the tower." No. Izuku couldn't lose Twice. He was all he had left. Izuku tried to get up to shield Twice, but his body just wouldn't move. His injuries were taking longer to heal than usual, probably from just how much damage he had sustained, and how he hadn't eaten in about a month. Izuku watched as the man cocked his arms back and then swung down, all as he yelled out for the man to stop. But the man didn't stop, and his scythe wedged itself right into Twice's chest. Izuku looked on in horror, his heart dropping in his chest as his brother let out a terrifying noise, one similar to the one his mother made 6 years ago. Twice would look over towards his younger brother, tears soaking into his mask as he gave Deku a little thumbs up. Don't worry, it's just a flesh wound. Hardly even hurts at all. Just run, Deku. Run away. I'll hold this guy off." Twice's voice would begin to trail off as he lost consciousness. After taking so much damage, though, he finally knew he was the real Twice. And if Izuku got away, this moment would be perfect. But Izuku didn't do that. He instead did the thing Twice was trying to protect him from this whole time. He went full Ghoul. Izuku screamed. A scream filled with sorrow, fear, and rage as his wings sprouted out to their full extent and his wounds healed. Twice watched on, his eyes slowly closing as he apologized to Deku, knowing exactly what would happen next, and how terrible he'd feel about it afterwards. "Sorry, buddy. I couldn't protect you from yourself after all," Twice said, his body going limp as his eyes shut. The tower would turn around, seeing Izuku standing up with his wounds completely healed. He would go to speak, only for Izuku to begin shooting several blade-like projectiles at him, several of which lodging themselves right into his bone armor. He'd go to make a bone shield, only for him to notice he couldn't do it anymore. The trigger had worn off, and now all he could do was manipulate the remaining bone he had. This wasn't good. This kid's quirk was sharper than he thought. He'd be torn to shreds if he used his bone armor to make weapons or a shield. So, this is what the kid was really capable of. Damn. If only he hadn't lost it when using trigger. It really wasn't worth it. Izuku would rush forward while using his Kagane to apply suppressing fire on the enemy. The tower attempted to move, but Izuku had completely expected that, ramming his shin into the man's stomach, a loud cracking sound coming from the attack. It didn't hurt his leg, but the cracking was most likely from the man's bone armor shattering. Deku followed up with a flurry of kicks to the man's chest before using his Kagane to fire a volley at his legs, causing him to fall to his knees. The tower, with a look of terror in his eyes, would futilely try to conjure up another sword, but Izuku quickly shut that down by cutting off his forearm with a well-timed swipe from his wing. The man screamed out in pain, grabbing his newly acquired nub and looking up at Izuku with an angry grimace. Deku knelt down next to his victim, picking up the severed arm and showing it to the man. "Does this really hurt? I'm sorry. I had to incapacitate you anyways. I'm basically impossible to kill like this, but Twice isn't. If he dies, I'll come back here. Even if you can't heal, I'll pay you back all the pain his death will cause. Tenfold. Izuku would then spread his wings out, shooting another volley into the man's torso, the blades wedging themselves deep into his muscle. The tower would fall into the ground, barely able to comprehend what the hell just happened, or how a kid was so damn powerful. Izuku would then go over to Twice and pick him up, rushing out onto the street and running as fast as he could into town. On the way there, he'd dial Giran's number, the underworld contact that Twice knew. He'd request the best doctor they could get to help out Twice, telling Giran how badly the villain had been hurt. Once in town, Giran would tell Izuku to run towards a small rundown cafe, where a back alley doctor would meet them. All the while, Izuku would be telling Twice to hang in there, to stay with him, with Twice falling in and out of consciousness, groggily apologizing to Deku for being a bad older brother. Don't worry about it, Twice. Just save your strength. Just stay with me, okay? You have all the time in the world to make it up to me, alright? Izuku would burst into the rundown cafe minutes after they had just closed. A few of the staff members looking surprised, but the owner, a fair-skinned woman with dark blue hair, would usher the two upstairs into a small operating room. She'd instruct Izuku to leave the room, telling him she needed to operate immediately if he was to live. The Ghoul didn't want to leave his brother's side, but understood that he needed to, forcing himself to walk away from the room after a couple seconds. The last thing he'd see was Twice looking over at him, a worried expression on his face, before the door to the room closed. Izuku would then be escorted to a guest room by another staff member, where he'd wait anxiously. And then, the events of the graveyard would hit him. He had grievously injured someone. Not only that, he had taunted and basically tortured the man, promising to do so again if Twice died. Izuku would tug at his hair, wondering just what the hell was wrong with him. An hour or so later, the woman would enter Izuku's room, blood covering her uniform and gloves. She'd inform him that she did all she could, but Twice would likely die from blood loss. She had taken care of his wounds, but had no idea what his blood type would be, let alone how to attain said blood. After offering her condolences, she'd leave Izuku alone. The Ghoul would quickly get up and run into the operating room, running over and grabbing Twice's hand. 6 years ago, Deku had lost his mother, and now he'd lose his brother on the same day. Just what the hell kind of irony was that? Why did this have to happen now, or even happen at all? Why did someone want him dead? Everything he ever did was just because he wanted to live. Sure, Izuku was a bad person, but was it so bad that he was scared to die? He just wanted to be happy, to live a great life with his brother. Why was that such a bad thing? Twice wasn't a bad person. Twice just wanted to live a happy life. They didn't even hurt people anymore. Maybe both of them deserve to die for what happened in the past, but maybe they'd just be happier dead.